What's going on, everyone? So today we're back and we're talking about the tournament conclusions, giving you kind of the continuation. I'm actually going to show you the top 8 deck lists from yesterday, which we saw on stream. And also we're going to walk through the other 2 days, the 1K tournament on the Friday, on the 15th of November, and the 1K tournament that just concluded today. And my goodness, am I excited, because we're seeing a lot of meta shakeups. And actually, spoiler alert, today there were 0 Django Reds in the top 8. So once again, kind of reaffirming the statement that I said yesterday, which is, a lot of good players are playing Django Red. We don't know if Django Red's actually like this top back-breaking deck, or if it's just the fact that good players are playing it and they were playing Bubble before and it's an easy thing to swap into. But before we dive into the complete breakdown and actually go through each of the new deck lists and talk about the new cards being played, I want to give a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. We've been chatting. I actually streamed a good portion of the 2K tournament in my patron Discord, where I had a couple of people come in and join in, and we were chatting and discussing the games, which was a lot of fun. I can't wait to do that again for next week. And also, I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to use it for all your Star Wars Unlimited card needs. Let's talk about Star Wars tournaments this weekend. Starting us off with the 1K. Now, I don't have deck lists for this one. This is one on Friday. I mentioned this concluded, but I hadn't known the top 8. Here, as you can see, we had 2 Django Reds, 2 Django Tarkin Towns, a Palpatine Yellow, a Tarkin Blue, which was a little bit surprising, Han ECL, new Han that is, Quinlan Green, no ECL, just 30 HP base, Anakin Blue, and Kira Green. Now, as you can see, we actually saw a couple of similarities. So the Django Red players were actually in the top 8 in some cases of both tournaments. So again, a lot of people that are playing Django Red are just good players, right? They're just solid players and they're playing and they're just good at the game. So who knows if Django Red is this oppressive masterpiece or if it's just a really good deck that people are playing a lot. Well, we'll have to wait and see. Regardless of that, it is still a really good deck, and I would definitely put it at, well, closer to the top of the meta as of right now. The Han to ECL, this is not surprising at all. I expected new Han to remain in sort of that running. The fact that we see a Kira Green here, I think isn't super surprising. I mentioned this, but I think Kira is still one of the best soft control leaders, and it's still going to be a very solid deck. I'm a little bit surprised at seeing Palpatine Yellow versus the Palpatine Double Green. I know that a lot of people were kind of swapping back and forth between the Palpatine Yellow and Palpatine Double Green. One of the cards that really shined in this list for me was Cad Bane. I hadn't really expected to see Cad Bane in a more rampy controlling list. I expected more of a tempo end game, but honestly, people were just using Cad Bane to capture like 2 to 3 units and then just keep it on the battlefield as a 7/7. And it's pretty strong. And then eventually you just end the game with it in like a turn, which is really, really good. So that was really sweet. We didn't see much about Tarkin Blue. In fact, we didn't see any of this in terms of on stream. So I don't know what these lists were playing. I did see a little bit of Quinlan Green in the day 2, and I think the lists are very similar. Much running the Plo Koon, the R2s, and they're just kind of getting value throughout the curve. And just overall kind of getting some damage as you go along. A lot of them were playing General's Blade as well to pump up Quinlan. I think keeping Quinlan alive is really relevant, because when you do flip him, it becomes a really nice value engine, especially since things like Plo Koon coming in and ambushing, if you have the other 2 units. With Quinlan, you only need 1 other unit, can actually kill Boba Fett and the 7 HP leaders that are 5 to deploy, because Plo Koon is also a 5 to deploy unit, which is really, really sweet. So you don't even need to necessarily flip Quinlan, but if you have like a 6 to deploy unit, that could also knock them down because it's less them. The 5 deploy leaders are 5 cost, so it's actually less than, so you can still knock them down, which is really sweet. And then Anakin Blue. Again, we're seeing a lot of Anakin Blue. This is just day 1. Moving on to day 2, we spoke about the Anakin Blue. It's coming back again. We talked about the Djangos. There's 3 Django Reds. We have the Han Yellow. We have the Sabine ECL, the Rey Red, and the Kira Green. So a lot of duplicates, right? The Kira Green coming back, the Anakin Blue coming back, a couple of the same Django Tarkin Towns, the Sabine Green, Rey Red, and the Han Yellow were kind of new. I'm not going to talk about this too much because we're actually going to dive into, as you can see, all the deck lists off on the right hand side. We're actually going to talk about each one of them individually. And this one, they didn't really play out, okay? Play out the whole tournament. These bottom 4 they were played out, and the Django Reds and the Han Yellow, they were the top 4, and these were the bottom 4 in terms of actual finishes. But we didn't actually get to see a full completion of the bracket, as far as I'm aware of. We did see a Django Red versus Django Red Mirror, and we saw a Han Yellow versus Django Red, but I'm not sure if that was the right players in the right seats against the right players that they would have been matched against, because they didn't actually play it. They just split the top 4. But we'll talk about that more, as again, I talked about that yesterday. We're gonna actually dive into the deck list today. And then today's tournament, we had Palpatine Yellow coming back, 2 Anakin Blues, we had a Sabine ECL, we had a Yoda Yellow, which is absolutely sweet. Love Yoda Yellow, by the way. Quinlan Green yet again, Luke Green, very surprising, and a Bosk Blue. So first off, Palpatine Yellow, I believe it's the same player that was playing Palpatine Yellow in the previous games. He was basically popping up throughout the weekend. He just plays a lot of Palpatine Yellow. I think it's Rando Mando was his name. Has been playing Palpatine Yellow from set 1, so same leader there. Double Anakin Blue, so this isn't just the same Anakin Blue that we're going to talk about today. There's going to be one that's different, I suppose. There might be the same exact list, but Anakin Blues. And we're seeing now, this is the 4th Anakin Blue across the top 8s. Actually up there with Django Red, which is really surprising. Did not expect Anakin Blue. Another Sabine ECL. We already knew that this was going to pop up. I don't think people are excited about playing ECL Sabine right now. I'd be interested to see how much of the meta was actually Sabine Green, because I think a lot of people are trying out the new stuff, including Yoda Yellow. Now, this is the combo-oriented yellow with now there are 2 of them, and You're My Only Hope. I've built this list before. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a little bit more situational. I think like Yoda Green and Yoda Blue is a little bit more consistent, but it is not nearly as explosive as Yoda Yellow. If you do get the now there are 2 of them and the You're My Only Hope, it is really strong. And You're My Only Hope can work well, period, if you're just removing units, because you can control the top of your deck with Yoda, which is really, really sweet. So can't wait to dive into that list when we actually play it for a video. Quinlan Green, not sure if this is the same one, but it's not an ECL version. Again, on day 2, we saw ECL version in the stream, but day 1 was 30 HP base Quinlan Green, whereas this one was also the same thing. Luke Green coming in, a little bit of value plays. I'd be excited to see what Luke Green is playing in that list that's new. It might just be the same Luke Green that we're used to with the U-Wing Reinforcements, Alliance Dispatcher getting value, pumping out units early and getting some value from shield tokens. And then, of course, Bosk Blue. This one's very similar to what we were seeing in set 2 at the end of it. The hard control list and just kind of killing all your opponent's units, healing up, and getting value from Bosk himself. But now that we've talked about all the top 8s, again, Anakin Blue and Django Red being the huge winners here. We're talking about 4 of the 24 slots being Anakin Blue, and then 5 of the 24 slots being Django Red. We also had 2 slots being Quinlan, and we also had a couple of other ones, like 2 spots being Kira, 2 spots being Palp Yellow, 2 spots being Sabine Yellow, 1 spot being Yoda Yellow. So a lot of new stuff being shown here, and not just completely dominated by Django Red at all. We gotta dive into the top 8 lists, actually deck lists, and see what cards specifically are being played across these ones. All right, so we're going to talk about all the Django Reds first up and see the little bit of differences between them all, if there is any. I think a couple of them were KTOD players, so they might just be all part of the same testing team and just playing the same lists. But they are going with the space strategy. You'll see this very frequently. You'll have the couple of 1 resource plays like ISB Agent and Greedo, which are just high value plays in the early game and synergize very well with Django, right? Greedo getting that discard trigger, and ISB Agent especially being able to reveal an event, deal damage, and exhaust something is really, really powerful. Some lists are running the Crafty Smuggler. This is just a really high value early game unit that doesn't die, gets that shield, and can sometimes just play that defensive, exhaust your unit by attacking into it and not losing my unit type game plan. So very limited in terms of ground units, but no new cards really in the ground units except for one, which we'll talk about in just a moment, and I'm very excited to talk about this one. In terms of space, again, very similar to Boba Fett. I'm actually going to flip myself over on the right hand side so it's a little bit easier for you all to see. Very similar to the previous Boba Red space unit decks, right? 7th Fleet Defenders, TIE Phantoms, Imperial Interceptors, TIE Advance, Fett's Fire Spray, Ruthless Raider, Mercenary Gunships, TIE Silencer, Cartel Spacer. All these are standard stuff. The only new card in the space arena is P-38. And this one is arguably the best space unit in the entire deck. That's Fire Spray is great. It's a great finisher. Ruthless Raider, also a great finisher. Also a great hit against on Triple Dark Raid. But this really synergizes with the Tarkin Town and Django and allows you to dominate the early game to not get overrun in the ground arena. Turn 1, you go Silencer. Turn 2, you go P38. Deal damage to something, Tarkin Town away that unit, and suddenly you have dominated the early game, and your opponent can't even retaliate because that P38, if it hits that first turn unit, it exhausts it with Django Fett, so it prevents your opponent from really interacting in the space arena on the early turns, which allows you to close out the game extremely quickly. This is the unit that is really exciting, and we're going to see this be a full 3 of across the board. It is one of the most impressive cards from set 3, and just a common, guys. It is really, really powerful. In terms of events, very few new additions. Triple Dark Raid, Surprise Strike, No Good to Be Dead, Force Choke, all standard stuff. The only new card that we're really seeing here is Breaking In, and the reason why this is because it's essentially 4th and 5th copies of Surprise Strike minus 1 damage. That's pretty much it. You're not really seeing this kind of get past Sentinels. There's not a ton of Sentinels in the meta. It's just about getting that +2/+0 and getting a little bit more value in that way. Daring Raid's a nice combo with Darken Town as well. In terms of upgrades, we got a 1 copy of Vambrace Flamethrower. This is just kind of thrown in if you do happen to get that Django Vambrace Flamethrower turn where you get to exhaust your opponent's entire battlefield. It's really sweet. I don't really like this card. We saw it on camera. It just got bamboozled off the unit, or it was trying to be, they were trying to set up for a sweet turn with Vambrace Flamethrower, and it just never really panned out. But it is a kind of fun of one of that can do some major work. In terms of sideboard, you get Bazine Natals, Disabling Fang Fighters, another Vambrace Flamethrower, Imperial Interceptor, TIE Advance, and Cad Bane. A lot of things to compete against other Djangos, right? Imperial Interceptor is really solid. TIE Advance to work with ISB Agent and 7th Fleets. We have another Vambrace Flamethrower to try to exhaust everything. Bazine Natal is actually really strong in this deck, especially because not only do you get that effect of messing with your opponent's hand, but also it becomes an exhaust unit with the Django just attacking into something and exhausting it, which is actually relevant. And Cad Bane is a really amazing sideboard card. This is something that I realized very quickly. I was trying to put like 1 or 2 of main deck. Turns out Cad Bane's much more of like a really solid sideboard card where you pull him in and he just completely changes the game in the late game if you end up in that spot. We saw this thing taking over like Ruthless Raiders. We saw it just completely wiping your opponent's entire space arena, taking things like a P38 to P38 and a 7th Fleet, just like 3 units, just grabbing them all. It's just so crazy. Cad Bane's a really excellent sideboard card and one of the cards that we really love to see in the deck. So really awesome Django list, but we got more Django lists to talk about. And this is the second one. And I actually forgot to talk about the Heavy Persuader tank, which we'll talk about now actually, in this second Django list. Heavy Persuader tank looks a little bit unassuming. This 7 resource, 6/5, deals 2 damage to a ground unit when you play it. Doesn't seem that great, right? The advantage of this is immediately getting the death trigger of Ruthless Raider, or just kind of cheating on resources to get this extra when played exhaust trigger while getting a 6/5. So the exploit trigger usually is exploiting out things like ISB Agent, Greedos, Bazines, or the Ruthless Raider itself to get that death trigger. This is one of the most impressive one-of cards. It's not a card that you're really going to be like, oh, I'm definitely playing this card every single time. It's one of those cards where in some games it's going to be the winner of the game, and in other games you just resource it and forget about it. It's one of the things I like about Star Wars Unlimited. You could play these one-ofs that are really good in some scenarios and then kind of mediocre in others. But it's also a vehicle that you can hit off of Triple Dark Raid, which is extremely relevant as well. We saw in some of those games where Triple Dark Raid into Heavy Persuader tank, exhaust a unit and kill it, or exhaust a unit, kill another unit with a 6/5, bounce it back to your hand, exploit it out again. It's like crazy stuff you can do with Heavy Persuader tank. It's a really nice one-of. This deck, very similar. Crafty Smugglers, ISB Agent, Greedos, Cad Bane in the main deck, one of. In terms of space units, one of the minor differences is this one's running TIE Fighters, but basically the same space unit lineup. In terms of events, same thing, except for this one has 1 copy of Swoop Down. Can be nice to kind of use some of your space units to interact with the ground arena. In terms of sideboard, basically same thing. The only differences are 1 of Change of Heart and 2 of Wolf. I'm not a huge fan of Wolf. I think this card's pretty bad. I actually just stopped playing it entirely. So I prefer the first list, but this one is a pretty similar list to the other Django Red that we talked about. And the third one that we got to talk about here, Pretty same stuff in the ground arena. 1 Death Star Stormtrooper for an extra couple turn 1 plays. But we also get 2 Heavy Persuader tanks. Clearly this guy's on the Heavy Persuader tank, which honestly, I think I am as well. I would actually just play the 2 of if I was playing the Triple Dark Raid strategy. I think this card is absolutely amazing in the deck. And I think it actually has more implications and applications in the matchups than we even saw. Same space unit lineup for the most part. And events, same stuff going on here. Surprise strikes breaking in, daring raids, etc, etc, etc. Very flamethrower as an upgrade. In terms of sideboard, same thing again. Disabling Fang Fighters, no good to me dead, Bazines, etc, etc, etc. It's like the same lists. Everyone's playing the same Django list, and they're kind of modifying like 1 to 2 cards based on how valuable they thought the card was. So basically, Triple Dark Raid, vehicle focus, all space, and kind of getting in that way. But here's the thing with this. The reason why Triple Dark Raid seems like an interesting strategy to me, or maybe not as strong of a strategy that other people think it is because there's a really easy way to kind of interact with space units because they're weaker units if you are prepared for it. And I think this Han Yellow list actually has a really strong game against the Django Reds, especially if they modify the deck a little bit. So what new cards are we seeing in this double yellow Han list? Well, the first one is going to be the R2. R2, absolutely amazing. One of the best turn 1 plays in the entire game, if not the best turn 1 play in the entire game. Giving the card selection, being a 2/4 is really obnoxious. Can actually go ahead and do some work against things like Bazine without, dying off too quickly. It's just really sweet. Just having this 4 toughness body that actually gets to smooth out your draws. We get to see the Plo Koon, the 5 resource Plo Koon, really excellent card there. Absolutely amazing ambusher, can really dominate the game, especially if you get this guy down early. I'm a little bit surprised not to see Enfys Nest. I think this is something that people are sleeping on. Enfys Nest is extremely good, especially in the Boba or in the Django matchup. Because what you can start doing is bouncing things like TIE Silencer, bouncing things like 7th Fleet Defender, and every single turn, if you're bouncing something, it can be really strong, especially since it gets a when played trigger. And I think that's something that's really important. Anything that doesn't have a when played or ambush trigger in these decks is significantly weaker against Django because of the potential to exhaust, which is why Han Solo is good. I still think Han Solo is good, but oftentimes against the Django matchup, Han Solo is not actually going to do all that much because your opponent's going to have a lot of space units, which I think Enfys Nest has that little bit of dynamic, and that's the new Enfys Nest from set 3. But here in this space unit and event category, we have nothing new. We have the Hotshot Blaster in the sideboard, nothing new with the exception of Clear the Field, which I think is extremely good. Being able to return potentially multiple units, but essentially acting as a 2-cost waylay is really good in this deck. I absolutely love Clear the Field. And honestly, I could definitely see this being a main deckable card, maybe like a 1 or 2 of in addition to waylays, or spare the targets. But C-3POs, Bamboozles, Gamorrean Guards, Cantina Bouncers, pretty standard stuff, just kind of rounding out the deck. Here's the thing. In terms of the rest of the cards, Kira's, Cantina Bouncers, Tech, DJ combo, Liberated Slaves, I'm a little bit surprised on this one, to be honest. I guess they value the 5 points of toughness over like the extra Ezras. I prefer the Ezras, but maybe they tested and they found Liberated Slaves just to be a little bit better. The space units. This is the reason why I think Han actually has some really good applications against Django. Getting down a Millennium Falcon turn 1, immediately killing a space unit, and then forcing your opponent to Tarkin Town. Otherwise, you're just going to replay the Millennium Falcon and kill their next unit. Ozatuk Liberator Gunship. Doesn't even employ the full 3 of, but I think you should in this meta. The ambush, killing a unit and sticking around because a lot of your opponent's units are 3 power. Millennium Falcon, the big one, 5/5 ambusher for 6. Kills those space units. Really strong against the Django matchup, and overall just really strong against any opponents playing space units. And you still have the things that are really good about Han, right? The Tech DJ combo, the getting extra resources, getting down a Plo Koon and killing a unit, Han Solo or Enfys Nest, bouncing your units and getting that 7 flip turn, right? You could still do the Han Solo action, flip Han, attack, play a 7-drop like Enfys Nest and Han Solo against the normal decks. It doesn't really work against Django Red that well because your opponent can just exhaust Han. But I think this deck actually has a really good game against Django Red. So that was really exciting to see. Next one, we got the Anakin Blue list, which is the brand new leader from set 3. Nothing too crazy going on here. In fact, we have 0 new cards in the ground slot, 0 new cards in the space arena slot, 0 new cards in the event slot. The only new card they are playing here in the main deck is Perilous Position. And the reason for this is it comes in and it kills P-38s, 7th Fleet Defenders, TIE Advanced, it kills Phantom TIE, it kills Kylo Silencer, it kills Mercenary Gunship. It's the best card in the whole deck to deal with Jango. It is really strong. But then you're also playing main deck Razor Crest, so you can get back things like Perilous Position. It's actually a really sweet idea, and I absolutely love this sort of contesting space with your units here and upgrades. I personally prefer Concord Dawn Interceptors over something like Red 3. But that's just kind of my experience. I also do like Kiadi in the deck. I think you could definitely run a Kiadi or 2. I'm not a huge fan of the big expensive units because of waylays and because of exhaustion. So being able to interact with your opponent without going ahead and playing a unit is extremely important. And I also think Daring Raid is something that ends up just getting better and better if your opponent's playing P-38s, Mercenary Gunships, Silencers, etc. So you're going to have a lot of targets for that. But then you also still have the Bravados, because Anakin is, guess what? You're a win con. Anakin's coming down. He's smacking. He's bravadoing. He's smacking again, which is just absolutely amazing, okay? He is your win con. I still also like the 3 of full village protectors. This one's definitely a very different list than I was going with. I was going with the force kind of strategy. I think this is really good for what the meta is in these tournaments. If you're fighting against a lot of Jango res, I think Perilous Position is an amazing card, and I think you're going to find that a lot of these cards in the deck really fit against what your opponent's expected to bring in these tournaments. So I think Lego Pizza here did a good job of metagaming with this Anakin Blue deck. And guess what? He wasn't the only one, right? We had multiple other Anakin Blues reaching the top 8. Whether or not it was the exact same list or if it was the same person in some of those, I don't know. But definitely, absolutely doing some great work with Anakin Blue. So it's really sweet to see Anakin getting some spot or some time in the spotlight. Next up, we got the Sabine Green. Is there anything different with this list? Anything? Is there anything different? Nope. Still the same list entirely, with the exception of Brain Invaders, okay? This card is garbage. We saw it on stream. This card actually harmed the Sabine player more than it helped. And I don't know if this was just like a fun thing to try. People were memeing about it on stream, but this thing affects your own unit. They had a K2SO in hand. They didn't use the ECL at all. They were in game 3 against the Jango Red. They might have been able to get to top 4, but they played a Brain Invaders on the turn. They could have ECL'd K2 to kill their unit, get in some damage into their base, and then still have the K2 being a 4/4 with that when defeated trigger, which might have helped them close out the game. But instead, they played the Brain Invaders. Yes, they prevented Jango from exhausting things, but then they also prevent Sabine's action on the front side. They prevent the on-attack trigger, and they had a red 3 on the battlefield, which meant that they could not get that raid 1 to Sabine because Brain Invaders prevents all abilities on your leader and gaining extra abilities on your leader. So this card, I think, is an extreme big trap. I think this card's absolute garbage. I don't see anyone that should play it. And based on how we saw it in a top 8 match, it just reaffirmed everything. Everyone was memeing on it. Everyone thought it was trash. And I don't know. I'm not going to say that the player, thinks this is the absolute best card. Maybe they're just trying it out and trying it in a good tournament to see how applicable it was. Or maybe they've had some good experiences with it. But all I'm saying is when they played it, it actively deterred them from their strategy and actively made the game worse. The other thing that I think Sabine Green players should move away from is the full 3 of Darksabers. I've been doing a 1 of Darksaber. In some matchups, you can even put the other 2 in the sideboard. In some matchups, it's going to be really good. A lot of times people will bring in Confiscates and, Disabling Fang Fighters against Sabine for the Darksaber. So there's a lot of upgrade hate. But even more so, Django, if Django's going to be part of the meta, you don't want to have this big unit with all your resources into them, because you're just going to get exhausted every single turn. And we saw that. We saw Sabine Green try to do some things in the game, but Django would just attack it with Greedo, exhaust. Attack it with Crafty Smuggler, exhaust. Attack it with Crafty Smuggler the next turn, exhaust. And Sabine just couldn't get any damage in, which is really, really unfortunate. So pretty similar list than we're used to. I think that this list is solid. I think it's an excellent list in terms of Sabine Green. This one's a 51 card special, but I personally would go less on Metal Ceremonies, less on Dark Sabers, more of just standard units along the curve, having a total of, well, in this case, 3, 6, 9, 11, 13 turn 1 plays is a little bit on the lower side for Sabine, especially with 2 of those being X-Wing and 2 of those being R2. I think putting extra K2 or not K2, what's the name? Ketsu Onyo, and even the new Jin Urso, I think is significantly more exciting, especially since they're both rebel units that can work with Fleet Lieutenant, or Jin is a rebel that can work with Fleet Lieutenant. Ketsu is more of like a 1 or 2 of, but it works excellently against Django's because you can get rid of shield tokens with the 7th Fleet. You can get rid of shield tokens on Crafty Smuggler. You can even trade in with the Crafty Smuggler, which is really, really relevant as well. So I think those cards are pretty good, but that's going to be the Sabine Green list. We've got the Ray Red, and how many more lists? Okay, 2 more lists with the Ray Red. Ray Red here coming in. Any new cards from this one? Not really. Not really. The only new cards, Senatorial Corvette and Perilous Position. People are on the Perilous Position. You can get the exhaust, but also it's just a -2/-2, kind of like the Make an Opening, but gives you a little bit more additional kind of options, right? You could be playing Make an Opening instead of this Perilous Position, but it's not permanent. And that's what people like about Perilous Position more, is that you could put it on like a Jango Fett and make him a 1/5 for the rest of the game and get that exhaust trigger. When if you just have a Make an Opening, yes, you could still kill the P-38s, you could still kill the mercenary gunships, you could still kill the Kylo Silencer, and you get a heal, but it's not as good universally as Perilous Position is. So I think that's a really interesting addition to multiple decks now that we've seen. This one, very similar to what you'd expect. A little bit of Force synergy with Force throws and a lot of your Force units. We got the Pillage, the Open Fires. We have the defensive units like Restored Arc and Village Protectors, early game units. I think it's a little bit low on early game units, right? We have 3, 6, 8, 11 early game units, which is pretty low, especially for a Ray deck. I would go a little bit higher than that. And then the Senatorial Corvette looks like a little bit of a value piece / end game win con. System Patrol Craft, again, I think this is a meta adaptation for the expectation of a lot of space units, because it is a Sentinel in space. It's the only reason you're really playing it, and that's the full 3 of Concord Dawn Interceptors alongside that, which is really, really important as well. In terms of sideboard, anything new? Nope. Pretty standard stuff. Important to note, people are moving away from Fell the Dragon, and I think this is really, really important because we're seeing a lot of cheaper units that don't die to Fell the Dragon. Plo Koon doesn't die to Fell the Dragon. You have all the space units that don't die to Fell the Dragon. A lot of the new units that are being played in the early game don't die to Fell the Dragon. And that's a big difference compared to like Podamarons and Wreckers and things that were dying to Fell the Dragon all the time. So that's an important adaptation to make as well. And lastly, we have the Kira Green list. Is there anything new? One of the big ones is Rune Hako and Calculating Magna Guard. So Rune Hako, really nice turn 1 play, just a 3/2, but also gives that extra when played trigger that could actually be relevant in killing things like Greedo and killing things like a space unit by giving it -1/-1 just for this phase. So you could finish it off with some other things, which is really, really nice. The Calculating Magna Guard acts as a 3-cost, 3/4 Sentinel, so it prevents you from taking in a bunch of damage, which is really nice. But this ends up stalling out the game, which is really, really important for Kira. It also, in some cases can get a shield token and be even more obnoxious. Same normal win cons in Darth Vader and Maul. Even in the Snoke. Snoke is excellent as a late game finisher because it just removes any potential for space dominations from your opponent, which is really, really important. In terms of space units, really important new one, Devastating Gunship. This one is absolutely excellent for taking on all the different space units that people are gravitating towards. If you're again fighting Jango Red, I'm talking about Jango Red a lot because it was the most dominant one here in this tournament, or the most impactful one. But it's something that I'm saying. There's so many different answers to all those really, really weak space units that you're going to find that in the future, I think Jango Reds are going to be a lot harder to actually win the game for. Devastating Gunship, killing something, ends up being a 3/5. You put a shield token on it with Kira. Guess what? Becomes a 5/3 shielded. Really actually annoying card and can win the game on its own. Same removal in Vanquish, Vigilance, Takedowns, Fell the Dragons, Power the Dark Side, etc. In terms of upgrades, we got that Perilous Position yet again. So it's coming up again and again and again. I definitely underrated this card. I thought it was going to be solid. I think it had some potential, but I wasn't really considering it like a 2 or 3 of in main decks. I was playing Equalize. Not in the non-double blue decks, but we don't see any double blue decks, so I'm sure we'll see Equalize. So I know how powerful the -2/-2 can be, but I just wasn't on Perilous Position nearly as much as everyone else was, and I think that is a major contender to why some of these decks actually were able to compete against Django Red so frequently. And then in the sideboard, we have the Super Laser Blast, the Palpatine's Return, Traitorous, Top Target, Relentless that we're normally used to. I'm a little bit surprised to see no Super Laser Blast in the main deck. Definitely a one of for me. Generally speaking, in some of those matchups, it could just be completely oppressive. But overall, that's going to wrap up kind of all of the deck lists today. And again, a lot of people are on Django. A lot of people are saying this is the best deck in the format. I am not in that position. I think there's a lot of ways to deal with all space strategies. This is not necessarily all space, but it's very much focused in space. And I think focusing in space is a good gimmick. And what I mean by that is it's a strong deck and it has a really good kind of curve and it has some implications, but going all space leaves you open to so many different problems, especially in that mid game with things like Devastating Gunship, Conquer Dawn Interceptor, System Patrol Crafts, Liberator Gunships, Millennium Falcons. All these things just do so well against the space units that I think it might be a little bit tough to consistently pull this off, especially when people are expecting it. So again, not saying this is a bad deck. I still think it's one of the better decks in the format right now, especially since Boba Fett is gone. It's just a matter of, are you going to be able to continue to do this with the same success? That's when the next couple of weeks are coming. Han Yellow, I think this deck's always going to be good. At least for the foreseeable future. I expected it to be one of the best decks in the format. Anakin Blue, this one's a little bit surprising to me. I expected Anakin to be good, but I wasn't necessarily on like Anakin Blue being the Anakin deck. So being green, is it going to be excellent? We'll see. Ray Reds, maybe sticking in there with the Perilous Position, and Kira Greens. One thing that I have not seen yet is 0. Now there are 2 of them. I'm not sure if people tested it and found it to be really poor against the specific strategies. I've played against Django Red. I still think now there are 2 of them can be really good in some decks. Not that every deck should be playing it. Like, I don't think Han Yellow should necessarily be playing it. It's just too many cards in your hand to take advantage of now there are 2 of them plus Han Solo's ability. So I agree that you shouldn't be playing it in the Han Solo, but we saw 0 of the Django Fets, which makes sense because they're space-based decks. So if you're going triple dark raid, you can't play now there are 2 of them. Of course, no Anakin Yellows or anything like that, or Rays or anything else. No one else could have played now there are 2 of them. It was just the Djangos, but they were all space-based, so you weren't seeing now there are 2 of them. I'm sure that the Yoda Yellow was playing now there are 2 of them. So I'm going to be interested to see if we're going to see more of those going forward. I think that's one card that's on my radar. I know a lot of people were excited about it, and I know I was as well. And I still think it's an extremely powerful card. I've played against the Django Reds. I've played against these decks, and now there are 2 of them still very good. Even if you can't exhaust it, it's a must exhaust at that point, which is really, really important. So overall, that's going to be the top 8 list. I'm going to leave a link to every single one of these down below so you all can check them out if you're interested in checking them out. Or picking up any of the cards, feel free to do so. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.